It was a small sanctuary, but not really a temple. The temple that you can see was dedicated to Zeus in Athens.
Ah, I see, yes, I see.
Okay, so do you have your questions ready? Because here is the spot it all happened. So here is the spot where they came to predict the future. So the oracle, exactly. So we have to imagine that we are standing now next to the entrance of the temple of Apollo. The entrance at these ancient times always faced the east side, the side where the sun came up. Why? Because they had no electricity, so they could use the light of the sun in their temples. So right behind you or next to you, you can see the altar of Apollo. It's that construction. So you have to imagine that on that altar, people would come and make their offers. Goats, oxen, sheep, things like that, okay? And making an offer at that time was a way of making a primitive selection. Because people were arriving here, lots of people, so it was practically impossible to give an answer to all these people. So they had to make a selection. So the priests told you when you arrived here, okay, you can start your offer. And if the animal was willing to step on the altar, this was interpreted as a good sign, so you could continue with making the question. If the animal was not willing, refused to step on the altar, you had to leave. So making selection at that time. The temple, we have to imagine that there was a circle of columns, and from the inside there was a closed room, there was a wall, so it was roofed and closed, okay, the whole temple. Inside that temple, Pythia went and sat, and Pythia was the personal priestess of Apollo. It was a lady of about 50 years old. Now 50 years at that time, so it's like 85 today, because people would die earlier, okay? And Pythia was a function, as we say today, the king. So you can imagine during these 10 centuries that the oracle was in function, we did not only have one Pythia, but several, okay? Because they wanted each 10 years, more or less, another Pythia. So Pythia did not come in contact with the visitors, with the people making the question, but Pythia sat inside the temple, and the priests were the ones that would receive the questions and then also give the answers. So when we arrived here, we gave our question to the priests, and they would inform Pythia. Now, before the oracle started functioning each time, Pythia went and sat on her chair, and she started chewing on laurel leaves. She also drank some wine and used stimulating products. So we could say today that sometimes, more or less, she was a bit drunk. Okay? So right after that, she got the question, and she had to answer. So this is the spot where the priest started working. So what the priest had to do was translate what Pythia was saying, because she wasn't speaking Greek, she was rather, shouting something. So the priests had to translate, and this was also a way to protect the sanctuary. If it was not correct, it was not the fault of Pythia or Apollo, it was the fault of the priests who hadn't translated correctly. Now this looks a bit funny to us, but what happened at that time, because we definitely know that they wouldn't predict the future, because the people describe also that under the chair of Pythia we had sacred smoke coming, but most probably the priests put incense under her chair in order to make that, create that atmosphere. In any case, what happened if I, once again, the king of Sparta, arrived here and I had the question, shall I start the war against the Athenians? At the same time, one priest would leave that sanctuary and travel to Sparta. The other one would go to Athens and collect information. So how many soldiers, how many boats, what's the situation over there? Are people willing to take part in the war? Not, yes. So they traveled back after a few days. They would make the comparison, and based on that comparison, they would give 9 to 10 times the correct answer. This is how it was correct, and this is why people had to wait some days over here. They thought that Pythia had to be inspired and wait for the answer of Apollo. As I told you, maybe ridiculous for us today, but don't forget, I talked to you about the several city-states in the beginning. So Greeks needed places to unite and, well, create that feeling that they belong to the same ethnic group. Why? In order to protect their nation. So the Greeks used the Greek mythology, the Greek religion, in order to stay all Greeks, because the Persians attacked them, for example, and as I told you, when the Persians arrived here, they would all fight as one nation against the Persians. And more or less the same thing happened in our modern history when the Greeks united around the Orthodox Church, and they managed to keep their, well, Greek identity. They speak Greek today and we are Orthodox people, but we had 400 years the Ottoman occupation, and we kept our Greek, well, character thanks to the Greek Orthodox Church. So more or less the same thing happened at that time. Okay? Now, you can continue that way to reach the theater, which is the first thing that you meet, or the stadium. Now, in order to reach the stadium, you need 10 minutes, definitely. So it will be going up and going down. I wouldn't suggest you to see the stadium because the half of it has collapsed. Rather worth the trouble to walk till the theater, then you get a very beautiful view, but also an idea of how the temple, how big the temple was, because you have a view from above it, okay? It's always the same way back. So as I told you, I will be waiting for you outside the cafeteria at 1:30, okay? So see you later then. See you.